He was a man who had lost everything, a ghost haunted by the ghosts of others, walking through the wreckage of a life he no longer recognized as his own. Cast adrift on an ocean of grief after the loss of his wife, the anchor of his soul, and burdened by the invisible wounds of a war that had never truly left him, he was facing the final, crushing wave of foreclosure. With an eviction notice serving as the death warrant for the fragile life he'd built for his daughter, all he had left in the world were two beating hearts: his young child, whose future was the only star in his endless night, and his loyal German shepherd, a silent shadow that was the keeper of his broken pieces. With his back against the wall and the wolves of destitution howling at his door, an inheritance arrived, not of hope, but of rust and ruin, a scrap metal bus, a forgotten relic left by a father he remembered only as a failure. It was meant to be the final symbol of his defeat, a tombstone for his hopes, but it was also the only alternative to the streets. Hidden within its decaying metal shell lay a secret, a legacy of truth so profound and so dangerous it held the power to save his family or to ignite a fire that could consume them all. The home they would eventually build from this pile of scrap would leave his family and the world speechless, but first he had to unearth a past buried deeper than any grave. This is a story of how a broken man, guided by the unwavering instinct of his loyal dog, rediscovered a purpose worth fighting for. To see how this journey unfolds, and to support more stories of hope and redemption, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support is the fuel for these narratives. John Harris was a man carved from the stone of resilience, yet the sculptor had been cruel, chipping away at him until only the raw, aching form of a survivor remained. In his late 40s, his face was a roadmap of a hard life, with lines etched around his eyes that spoke not of laughter, but of long nights staring into the abyss of memory. A military veteran, he carried the weight of his service not as a badge of honor, but as a shroud of perpetual weariness. His grief was a newer, sharper wound. The absence of his wife, Sarah, was a physical presence in their small, cramped apartment, a void that consumed laughter and warmth. He saw her in the gentle curve of their daughter Lily's smile, a heartbreaking reminder of all that was lost. Lily, at 7 years old, was the fragile, beating heart of his world, the one reason he forced himself to rise each morning. Her innocence was both his sanctuary and his torment, for protecting it felt like an impossible task. Compounding his emotional agony was the relentless pressure of financial ruin. His modest disability pension was a drop of water against a raging fire of debt. The city air, thick with fumes and indifference, seemed to cling to his daughter's lungs, and the medical bills for her chronic respiratory condition were a mountain he could no longer climb. The final notice had arrived that morning, a stark white flag of surrender taped to their apartment door. Foreclosure. The word was a death sentence to the fragile stability he had fought so hard to maintain for Lily. They would be on the streets within a month. As he stood there, the paper trembling in his hand, a profound, soul-crushing despair washed over him. He had failed. He had failed to save his wife, and now he was failing his daughter. The city, with its towering, indifferent skyscrapers, seemed to mock him, a concrete jungle with no place for a wounded lion. His only confidant in this desolate existence was Max, his German shepherd. Max was more than a dog. He was an extension of John's own frayed soul. The animal's intelligent, amber eyes watched him with an unnerving understanding. When the night terrors came, wrenching John from sleep, it was Max's heavy head on his chest that grounded him. Now, in this moment of utter hopelessness, Max leaned heavily against his leg, a silent, powerful reassurance. John looked down into those unwavering eyes and saw not pity, but a reflection of his own forgotten strength. It was a strength he would need, for the tide of his life was about to turn in the most unexpected and tumultuous way imaginable. Just as the last vestiges of hope seemed to flicker and die under the shadow of impending eviction, a letter arrived, a thin, brittle envelope that felt like a relic from another lifetime. The postmark was from a forgotten rural town, and the return address belonged to a man John had spent most of his adult life trying to forget: his father. An attorney's crisp, impersonal script informed him of his father's passing. John felt a strange emptiness, not grief, but the hollow echo of a relationship that had never truly been. The letter spoke of an inheritance. A week ago, John would have laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. What could a man who had nothing leave behind, but more nothing? But now, with the threat of homelessness breathing down his neck, the words on the page felt different. His sister, calling later that day, confirmed the details, her voice laced with a familiar, weary pity. He left you the property, John, and that thing on it. The thing was an old, dilapidated school bus, a hulking mass of rust that his father had dragged onto a small, forgotten plot of land decades ago, a project that was the ultimate symbol of his descent into eccentricity. To his sister, it was a final, posthumous burden. But for John, standing on the precipice of ruin, the news landed like a lifeline, however frayed. A burden? It was a roof. It was a shelter. It was the only thing standing between his daughter and the cold, unforgiving streets. With a grim, desperate resolve born of pure necessity, he made the decision. They would go. They had to go. There was nowhere else. The journey itself was a somber pilgrimage from one form of ruin to another. The meager possessions they owned were packed into the back of a borrowed, sputtering pickup truck. Lily, wrapped in her favorite blanket, sat quietly, her large, curious eyes taking in the decaying urban landscape as it gave way to the sprawling, empty countryside. She was too young to understand the depth of their desperation, seeing it only as a strange new adventure. For John, every mile was a confirmation of his failure. He was taking his sick child from a home with 4 walls and electricity to live in a metal box on a patch of dirt. He felt the sting of his sister's judgment, the imagined whispers of his old army buddies, the crushing weight of his own self-loathing. When they finally arrived, the reality was even bleaker than he had imagined. The land was choked with weeds, and there, in the middle of it all, sat the bus. It was a magnificent ruin, a carcass of steel slowly being reclaimed by nature. It looked less like a home and more like a tomb. As John stepped out of the truck, he looked at Lily, expecting fear or disappointment. Instead, she looked at the bus with a sense of wonder. "It's like a castle, Daddy," she whispered, her voice filled with a pure, untainted awe that pierced through John's despair like a ray of light. He forced a smile. A scrap metal castle for his little princess. Max, ever perceptive, leaped from the truck and began to circle the bus, as if inspecting their new fortress. For the first time in a long time, John felt a flicker of something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not yet, but a grim determination. This ruin was his. This land was his. It was the last thing his father had given him, and for his daughter's sake, he would make it a home. He would build a life from the wreckage, because he had absolutely no other choice. The initial days in the bus were a brutal baptism into their new reality. The cavernous metal interior was a symphony of discomfort, amplifying the summer heat into a sweltering oven and trapping the nighttime chilled deep within its steel bones. Every surface was coated in a film of grime and decay, and the air was thick with the musty scent of rust and forgotten time. John worked with a frantic, desperate energy, fueled by coffee and the sight of Lily's pale face. He scrubbed the floors until his knuckles were raw, patched the cracked windows with sheets of plastic, and battled an army of spiders that had long claimed the vehicle as their own. He was a soldier again, but his new enemy was entropy itself, the relentless force of decay. He built 2 small, crude beds from salvaged lumber, a small table, and a set of shelves. It was a Spartan existence, a life stripped down to its barest essentials, shelter, food, and the desperate, all-consuming love for his child. He cooked their meals over an open fire outside, and they washed using water hauled in plastic jugs from a pump in the nearest town, miles away. For Lily, however, the hardship was overshadowed by the novelty of it all. She saw the bus not as a symbol of poverty, but as a secret clubhouse. The surrounding woods were an enchanted forest, and Max was her loyal knight, always by her side as she explored their new kingdom. Her laughter, when it came, was a sound so precious it felt like a physical warmth against John's weary heart. But her cough persisted, a rattling, ever-present reminder of her fragility and his inability to provide the comfort and care she truly needed. It was during a particularly bleak afternoon, with rain drumming a somber, metallic rhythm on the bus's roof, that the shift happened. John was sitting at the small table, staring blankly at a pile of unpaid medical bills he had brought with him, the numbers swimming before his eyes, each one a testament to his failure. The weight of his despair was a physical pressure, making it hard to breathe. Lily was asleep, her small form curled up under a pile of blankets. Suddenly, Max, who had been dozing at John's feet, shot up, his body tense and alert. A low, guttural whine rumbled in his chest, a sound John had never heard him make before. The dog moved to a specific spot on the floor, near the rear of the bus, an area John had covered with a threadbare rug. He began to paw at the rug, his movements growing more insistent, more frantic. "Easy, boy. What is it?" John murmured, his voice thick with exhaustion. He assumed a mouse or some other creature was hiding beneath the floorboards. But Max ignored him. He peeled back the corner of the rug with his nose and began scratching at the grimy metal floor, his claws making a sharp, grating sound that set John's teeth on edge. The dog's urgency was unnerving. His whining escalated into short, sharp barks, directed not at John, but at the floor itself. "Max, knock it off," John commanded, his voice sharper than he intended. The dog paused, looked back at him with an expression of such profound, desperate pleading that it silenced John's irritation. There was an intelligence in those eyes, a desperate need to communicate something vital. This was not the behavior of a dog chasing a rodent. This was a signal. John had seen dogs like Max in the service, animals trained to detect things unseen, to sense dangers invisible to human eyes. Max had never been trained for such things, but his instinct was screaming at his master. With a sigh of resignation, John knelt beside him. He ran his hand over the cold metal floor. It seemed perfectly solid, no different from any other part of the bus. But Max nudged his hand insistently, whining again, his nose pushing against one specific, unremarkable spot. John pushed back and felt it. A slight give, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the metal plate beneath his fingers. His heart began to beat a little faster. He looked around, found a heavy-duty screwdriver he'd been using for his repairs, and wedged the tip into the faint seam Max had been indicating. He scraped away decades of grime and rust, revealing the faint but unmistakable outline of a rectangular panel, its seams expertly hidden. It was a hidden compartment. With a grunt of effort, he pried it open. The panel lifted with a groan of rusted hinges, revealing not a shallow storage space, but a dark, hollow cavity, expertly welded into the chassis of the bus. The animal's instinct had not been wrong. It had led him to a secret, a piece of his father's hidden world, waiting silently beneath their feet all along. A wave of musty, dry air, the scent of old paper and sealed-off time, rose from the dark cavity. John stared into the compartment, his mind struggling to catch up with the reality of the discovery. Kneeling on the cold floor, with Max panting softly at his side, as if to say, "See, I told you." John reached into the darkness. His fingers brushed against the smooth, worn texture of leather. He pulled the object into the dim light of the bus and found himself holding a thick, beautifully bound journal. It was the first of several. He lifted them out one by one, 5 in total, their leather covers preserved in the dry, dark space. Beneath them lay other items, each one more perplexing than the last. There were rolled-up schematics, not for a building or machine he recognized, but for something intricate and organic-looking. There were geological survey maps of their very property and the surrounding region, covered in his father's spidery, precise handwriting. And at the very bottom, nestled in a velvet cloth, was a strange, heavy object, a polished brass core sample, a cylinder of rock layered with a mesmerizing, iridescent blue mineral that seemed to drink the light. For a moment, John just sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of his father's obsession. He felt a tremor of the old resentment. Was this it? The great secret? A bunch of crazy drawings and some old diaries. He felt a fool for letting the dog's antics get his hopes up. But the sheer meticulousness of it all, the care with which these items had been hidden, gave him pause. This was not the work of a scattered, failing mind. This was the work of a man with a profound and hidden purpose. With a deep breath, he opened the first journal. The date on the first page was from over 30 years ago. The handwriting was the same precise script he'd seen on the maps, and the words that flowed across the page were not those of a madman, but of a brilliant, passionate scientist. As he read, the image of his father that he had carried for a lifetime began to dissolve. The man in these pages was not the reclusive failure he remembered. He was a hydrologist, a visionary who had dedicated his life to a single, noble cause, solving the world's water crisis. The journals told a stunning story. His father had discovered that the unique geological makeup of this specific region, the very land the bus now sat upon, had produced a mineral, the same blue mineral as the core sample, with extraordinary properties. When integrated into a specific type of filtration system, detailed in the schematics, it could purify even the most toxic water, removing heavy metals, bacteria, and industrial pollutants with near-perfect efficiency and at a fraction of the cost of any existing technology. It was a discovery that could change the world, bringing clean, safe water to millions. The bus, John realized with a jolt, had never been intended as a home. It was a mobile laboratory, a discreet, off-grid command center from which his father could conduct his research without drawing attention. He read on, his initial skepticism melting away into a growing sense of awe and a profound, aching sadness for the man he had never known. The story then took a darker turn. His father had attempted to bring his discovery to the world. He had approached corporations, government agencies, and scientific bodies. But he was met not with celebration, but with a wall of silent, powerful opposition. His research was discredited, his reputation sabotaged, and he was professionally ostracized. A massive, shadowy corporation, a global behemoth in water privatization named Apex Global, had systematically worked to bury his findings and paint him as a charlatan. They couldn't steal his research because the mineral was the key, and its location was his secret. So instead, they destroyed him. They turned a hero into a fool, a visionary into an eccentric recluse. He had retreated not out of failure, but for protection, to guard the one secret that could dismantle a corrupt empire built on the commodification of a basic human right. John's hands trembled as he held the journal. The weight of his father's secret war, his silent, lonely battle, settled upon him. He looked around the bus, no longer seeing a scrap metal tomb, but a fortress, a legacy. His father hadn't abandoned him. He had been protecting him, protecting this truth. The inheritance was not the rusted bus or the worthless land. The inheritance was this mission. As the rain continued to fall outside, John felt a profound shift within him. The crushing weight of his own failures began to feel smaller, replaced by the heavy mantle of his father's purpose. He was no longer just a broken veteran fighting for his own survival, but the son of a hidden hero, the custodian of a truth that could change the world. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the enemy his father had fought was still out there, and they would not let this secret rest in peace. The sense of being watched began as a subtle, prickling sensation on the back of John's neck, a ghost of an instinct he hadn't felt since his last tour overseas. In the days following the discovery of the journals, the oppressive silence of the wilderness around them had changed. It no longer felt empty, it felt observant. He would catch fleeting movements in the periphery of his vision while gathering firewood, or find footprints near the edge of the property that were not his own. Max felt it too. The dog had become a vigilant sentinel, often standing at the edge of the woods for long stretches, his body rigid, a low growl occasionally vibrating in his chest, his gaze fixed on something unseen. John had spent every waking moment devouring his father's journals, the schematics spread across the small table, his mind racing to connect the complex scientific principles with the raw, tangible hope they represented. He was beginning to understand the genius of the system. It wasn't just a filter. It was a self-sustaining ecosystem, designed to be powered by a geothermal vent his father had mapped somewhere in the nearby hills. It was a gift to the world, gift wrapped in secrecy. He knew he had to be careful. The enemy his father described in the journals, Apex Global, was not some faceless corporation. It was a predator, and his father's writings were a chilling testament to its ruthlessness. Then, the predator came to him. It arrived not with a roar, but with the silent, arrogant crunch of expensive tires on the gravel track leading to the bus. A sleek, obsidian black sedan, so out of place in the rustic wilderness it looked like a shard of another, darker world, glided to a stop a respectful distance away. A man emerged from the driver's side. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than John had earned in the past year, and he moved with the polished, predatory grace of a shark. His smile was a masterpiece of corporate affability, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, analytical, and they scanned the dilapidated bus, John, and a curious Lily who peeked from the doorway with an unsettling air of appraisal. "Mr. Harris?" "John Harris," the man asked, his voice smooth as silk, yet carrying an undeniable authority. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I'm with Apex Global." John felt a jolt, as if an electric current had shot through him. He instinctively moved to stand slightly in front of the bus door, shielding Lily from view. Max, who had been silent until now, let out a low, menacing growl from just inside the doorway. Sterling's smile didn't falter, but he gave the dog a brief, dismissive glance. "I won't take much of your time," he continued, taking a step closer. "Our company is in the process of acquiring land in this region for a conservation project. This parcel, as remote as it is, has come to our attention. I'm here to make you an offer." He spoke of conservation and environmental stewardship, his words a beautifully crafted facade. John, armed with his father's truth, heard only the lies. He listened in stony silence as Sterling laid out the terms. The offer was staggering. It was more money than John had ever dreamed of, enough to secure the best medical care for Lily for the rest of her life, enough to buy a real house, a real life, to erase every financial burden that had ever haunted him. Sterling was a master of his craft. He spoke of John's military service with feigned respect, mentioned the difficulties of raising a child alone, and even alluded to Lily's health with a tone of deep, manufactured concern. He was targeting every single one of John's vulnerabilities, pressing on the bruises of his soul with surgical precision. "It's a generous offer, Mr. Harris," Sterling concluded, his eyes locking onto John's. "Enough to give your daughter the future she deserves. All for a piece of land and, well, this old bus. We'd even have it hauled away for you, no charge." The thinly veiled insult, the dismissal of his father's life's work as mere scrap, ignited a spark of cold fury in John's chest. For years, he had been defined by his loss and his weakness. Now, standing on this small patch of earth, in front of this rusted-out monument to his father's secret heroism, he felt a sense of strength he hadn't known he possessed. He was no longer just John Harris, the broken veteran. He was the son of a man who had fought this very monster. He looked Sterling directly in the eye, his voice quiet but as solid as bedrock. "It's not for sale." Sterling's smile finally vanished. For a fleeting second, the mask of civility slipped, revealing the cold, reptilian predator beneath. A flicker of annoyance, of disbelief, crossed his features. He had come here expecting to buy a broken man's last hope for a pittance, and had instead hit a wall of defiance. He regained his composure almost instantly, his tone shifting from friendly to something far more menacing. "I think you should reconsider," he said softly, the words hanging in the air like a threat. "Opportunities like this don't come twice. It would be a shame if unforeseen circumstances were to make your current situation even more difficult." The threat was clear, and it was aimed directly at the heart of John's world, Lily. The unspoken words echoed in the space between them. "We know about her condition. We know how fragile your world is. We can break it." John's hand clenched into a fist at his side. The primal, protective instinct of a father at war surged through him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I think you should leave," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Now." For a long moment, the two men stood in silent opposition, a clash of two worlds. Sterling, representing a global empire of greed and power, and John, a lone sentinel guarding a legacy of truth. Finally, Sterling gave a curt, humorless nod. "As you wish," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He turned and walked back to his car, the silent promise of his return hanging heavy in the air. As the black sedan disappeared down the track, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a profound sense of dread, John knew the battle had begun. His father's war was now his own. The visit from Arthur Sterling was the catalyst that transformed John's passive discovery into an active mission. The veiled threats against Lily had lit a fire in him, burning away the last vestiges of his apathy and fear. This was no longer about uncovering the past. It was about fighting for the future. He knew he couldn't stay put. Sterling's unforeseen circumstances were not an idle threat, and the bus, once a sanctuary, now felt like a target. His father's journals were his new orders, the maps his field guide. The writing spoke of a final piece of the puzzle, a seed vault, where his father had stored not biological seeds, but the core of his research, the definitive, undeniable proof, protected from the elements and from his enemies. The location was hidden in the rugged, unforgiving terrain of the nearby state forest, a place his father had cryptically referred to as the heart of the mountain. The journey would be dangerous, and he couldn't leave Lily behind. With a heavy heart, he made a call to the one person he knew he could trust, despite their strained relationship, his sister, Sarah. He didn't tell her everything, just that he had stumbled onto something important to their fathers, and that he and Lily needed a safe place to stay for a few days. He could hear the skepticism and worry in her voice, but his newfound resolve, the steel in his tone, was something she hadn't heard in years. She agreed, hesitantly, to take Lily in. The farewell was agonizing. Leaving his daughter, the very reason for this fight, felt like leaving a part of his soul behind. "You be a brave girl for your auntie," he whispered, hugging her tightly. "Daddy has to go on a mission. I'll be back soon." Lily, with the trusting innocence of a child, simply nodded. "Is Max going with you?" she asked. "To protect you?" "Always," John said, looking at the German shepherd who stood by his side, his intelligent eyes fixed on John's face, already sensing the gravity of the coming journey. With Lily safe, John turned his full attention to the mission. He packed a bag with essentials, food, water, a first aid kit, and his father's journals and maps, carefully wrapped in waterproof plastic. He felt a familiar sense of purpose, the muscle memory of preparing for a patrol kicking in. He was no longer a broken man. He was a soldier with a clear objective. The journey began at dawn. With Max trotting faithfully at his side, John plunged into the dense wilderness. The forest was a labyrinth of ancient trees, steep ravines, and deceptive game trails. It was here that Max's role shifted from companion to essential guide. The dog's senses were a living compass, an early warning system that far surpassed John's own honed instincts. On the second day, as they navigated a treacherous ridge, Max suddenly stopped, the fur on his back bristling. He let out a low, almost inaudible growl, his nose pointed down the trail behind them. John froze, listening. At first, there was nothing but the wind. Then he heard it, the faint, unnatural snap of a twig, a sound that did not belong to the rhythm of the forest. They were being followed. Sterling's men. The realization sent a chill down his spine, but it also hardened his resolve. He used his old training, doubling back, using the terrain to lay false trails, moving with a stealth he thought he had long forgotten. Max was his silent partner in this deadly dance, moving with an almost human understanding of the need for silence and cunning. The psychological toll of the journey was immense. The physical exhaustion was familiar, a dull ache he could push through, but the mental strain was different. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every rustle of leaves a potential enemy. He was haunted by the image of Lily's face and the coldness in Sterling's eyes. Doubt, like a venomous snake, would try to sink its fangs into him during the quiet moments. Was he chasing a ghost? Was he putting himself in mortal danger for the ramblings of a man he barely knew? Whenever that doubt began to creep in, he would look at Max. The dog's unwavering focus, his complete and utter faith in his master, was the antidote. Max's certainty became his own. After 3 grueling days, they reached the landmark his father had described in the final journal entry, a series of unique, jagged rock formations that looked like the bones of the earth. The map indicated that the entrance to the seed vault was near a waterfall his father had poetically named the Vale of Tears. As they drew closer, the sound of cascading water grew from a whisper to a roar. They found it nestled in a hidden valley, a breathtaking cascade of water tumbling down a sheer rock face into a crystal-clear pool below. It was a place of profound, untouched beauty. But there was no obvious cave, no entrance. John stood there, a sense of frustration and exhaustion washing over him. Had he come all this way for nothing? It was then that Max, once again, showed him the way. The dog, instead of drinking from the pool, walked directly towards the waterfall itself, disappearing behind the thundering sheet of water. John's heart leaped into his throat. He called the dog's name, his voice swallowed by the roar. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, Max poked his head back out, barking once a clear, sharp summons. Taking a deep breath, John followed, pushing through the cold, blinding curtain of water, and found himself in a different world. Behind the waterfall was not a shallow overhang, but a deep, dry cave entrance, its opening perfectly concealed by the cascade. The air inside was cool and still, a stark contrast to the thundering chaos of the water just inches away. It was a place of profound stillness, a sanctuary carved from the heart of the mountain by time and secrecy. John took out a powerful flashlight, its beam cutting through the ancient darkness, and what it revealed made him stop in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. This was no simple cave. The rough, natural rock walls quickly gave way to smooth, reinforced concrete. Steel support beams lined the ceiling, and electrical conduits ran along the walls, hinting at a hidden power source. It was a man-made structure, a bunker, built with incredible foresight and engineering skill. It was the seed vault. With Max at his heels, his paws making soft padding sounds on the smooth concrete floor, John ventured deeper. The corridor opened into a large, climate-controlled chamber. In the center of the room, illuminated by a soft, self-sustaining glow emanating from fixtures in the ceiling, was a long, steel table. And on that table, laid out with meticulous care, was his father's true legacy. This was it, the final, undeniable proof. There were binders filled with his complete, unabridged research, peer-reviewed and cross-referenced. There were detailed geological surveys, water toxicity reports from dozens of communities, and a working prototype of the filtration system, a beautiful, intricate device of copper and glass, with the iridescent blue mineral glowing softly at its core. But there was more. His father had been more than a scientist. He had been a strategist. He had compiled a mountain of evidence against Apex Global, a meticulously documented history of their crimes. There were sworn and notarized affidavits from other scientists his father had known, men and women who had been threatened, silenced, or had their careers destroyed by Apex for getting too close to the truth. There were internal corporate memos, leaked by a sympathetic source deep within the company, that detailed Apex's strategy of knowingly suppressing clean water technology and, most damningly, of strategically polluting aquifers in impoverished regions to create a market for their expensive bottled water. It was a crime against humanity, laid bare in cold, hard print. His father had built not just a sanctuary for his research, but an arsenal for justice. As John stood in the center of the vault, the soft hum of the geothermal generator a gentle pulse in the silence, he felt the full weight of his father's life. He saw the decades of lonely work, the paranoia, the sacrifice. He had been a warrior fighting a war no one else could see, and this vault was his final, unassailable position. In a sealed metal box, he found one last item, a small, handheld satellite uplink device, and a letter addressed to him. "My dearest John," it began, the familiar spidery script blurring before his eyes. "If you are reading this, it means I have failed, but you have succeeded. It means you have looked past the caricature the world made of me and found the truth. This vault, this research, is not my most important creation. You are. The contents of this room can save lives, but the courage to use it must come from the heart. This device will transmit the entirety of this data, the research, the evidence against Apex, to a network of trusted journalists and international legal bodies I cultivated long ago. It is a dead man's switch, a final testament. Once activated, the truth cannot be stopped. The choice is yours. Whatever you do, know that I was always proud of you. I just couldn't tell you. Your loving father." Tears streamed down John's face, tears not of sorrow, but of profound, aching love and understanding for the father he had finally, truly met. He was holding the weapon his father had forged, a weapon of pure, irrefutable truth. But before he could make a move, a cold, familiar voice echoed from the cave entrance, shattering the sacred silence of the sanctuary. "Quite the discovery, Mr. Harris. I have to admit, your father was more resourceful than we gave him credit for." Arthur Sterling stood there, flanked by two large, imposing men, his silken smile a grotesque mask of triumph in the soft light of the vault. He had found them. The final battle for his father's legacy was about to be fought. The sudden appearance of Sterling and his men transformed the hallowed sanctuary into a claustrophobic trap. The soft, ambient light of the vault now seemed to cast long, menacing shadows that danced on the concrete walls. Sterling sauntered into the chamber, his expensive shoes clicking on the floor, his eyes sweeping over the prototype and the binders of research with a greedy, possessive hunger. He looked at John, a mock expression of pity on his face. "You've been busy," Sterling said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "All this effort, all this misplaced sentiment. Your father was a fool. He could have been a very rich man. We offered. But like you, he was stubborn. He chose a legacy of dust and obscurity." He gestured around the vault. "And now, all of his hard work belongs to me. To Apex." John stood his ground, his body positioned between Sterling and the table that held his father's life's work. The satellite uplink device felt heavy in his jacket pocket, a secret weapon they hadn't yet seen. Max stood beside him, a low, continuous growl rumbling deep in his chest, his body coiled like a spring, every muscle tensed for action. "It will never belong to you," John said, his voice steady, infused with a conviction that surprised even himself. "This doesn't end the way you think it does." Sterling chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, I'm quite certain it does. You see, I'm not here to negotiate with you, John. Not anymore. I'm here to take what is ours. My men will secure the research, and you will have a tragic accident. A fall, perhaps, near the waterfall. A grieving father, pushed to the edge by his unfortunate circumstances. It's a sad story, but a believable one." He then delivered his final, cruelest blow, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But it doesn't have to be that way. I'm still prepared to be generous. Think of your daughter, John. Lily. That respiratory condition of hers. It requires very specialized, very expensive care. Care that a man with your limited resources could never afford. Walk away now. Leave this all behind, and I will personally set up a trust fund for her that will guarantee her the best doctors, the best treatments for the rest of her life. She'll never want for anything." It was the ultimate temptation, the devil's bargain laid bare. The life of his daughter, the one thing in the universe that mattered to him, in exchange for his silence. For a moment, his resolve wavered. The image of Lily, her small, frail body struggling for breath, flashed in his mind. But then, he thought of his father's letter. He thought of the communities being poisoned, the lives being destroyed by the very man standing before him. He looked at the prototype, the beautiful, elegant solution to so much suffering. To accept Sterling's offer would be to betray not only his father, but every ounce of honor he had left. It would be to save his daughter by sacrificing countless others. "My daughter will have the future she deserves," John said, his voice ringing with righteous anger. "But it won't be paid for with your blood money." Sterling's face hardened, the facade of civility crumbling into pure, venomous rage. "So be it. A pity." He gave a sharp nod to his men. "Take it." As the two henchmen moved forward, the climax erupted. Max, in a blur of black and tan fury, launched himself through the air. He was not a pet anymore. He was a weapon of pure, focused loyalty. He slammed into the first man, his jaws closing on the man's arm, the impact sending them both crashing to the floor. The second man, startled, reached for a weapon, but John was already in motion. His military training, dormant for years, took over with lethal efficiency. He moved with a speed and precision that Sterling could never have anticipated. He disarmed the second man with a series of sharp, decisive strikes, using the man's own momentum to send him sprawling. The fight was short, brutal, and one-sided. But Sterling himself remained untouched, his face a mask of shock and fury. "You can't win, Harris," he screamed, his composure finally shattered. "I own everything. I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth." "You're wrong," John said, breathing heavily, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He pulled the satellite uplink device from his pocket and held it up. "My father already won. 30 years ago." Sterling's eyes widened in horror as he realized what it was. He lunged for it, a desperate, clumsy attempt to stop the inevitable. But John was faster. He pressed the activation button. A small green light on the device began to blink, steadily at first, and then rapidly. A quiet, whirring sound filled the room. "What have you done?" Sterling whispered, his face ashen. "It's over," John said, his voice resonating with the finality of his father's victory. He called it a dead man's switch. All of it, the research, your memos, the affidavits, the proof of the poisonings, it's all being uploaded. Right now, to every major news agency and legal body on a list my father built his entire life. The choice is no longer mine to make. It's done. Sterling stood frozen, his empire of lies crumbling around him in the silent, humming sanctuary. He had been defeated not by fists or weapons, but by the unwavering power of truth, by a legacy of honor that had refused to die. The aftermath was a silent, deafening explosion that rippled across the globe. The data packet, unleashed from the heart of the mountain, was a digital bombshell. News agencies, fueled by the irrefutable evidence, descended upon Apex Global with a righteous fury. The story was on every screen, on every front page. The hidden hero, the revolutionary water-purifying technology, and the corporation's monstrous, decades-long conspiracy of poisoning and deceit. The scandal was catastrophic. Apex Global's stock plummeted into oblivion. Its board members were arrested, its assets frozen, and Arthur Sterling, the man who believed he was untouchable, was last seen in grainy news footage being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of utter ruin. The world, in its shock, learned the name of John's father. He was no longer a footnote of failure, but lauded as a visionary, a martyr for science and humanity whose work had finally been brought into the light. The technology, now in the public domain, was hailed as one of the most significant humanitarian breakthroughs of the century. For John, the return from a mountain was a journey back into a world that had been fundamentally altered. He was no longer a ghost. The weight of his past, the trauma, the grief, the failure, had been lifted, burned away in the crucible of his father's fight. He had found not just justice, but redemption. He had healed himself by healing his father's legacy. With the legal battles that followed, the rights to his father's land and intellectual property were firmly established. The property, once considered worthless, was now the site of the only known source of the miracle mineral, making it one of the most valuable pieces of land on the planet. But John had no interest in personal wealth. Guided by his father's spirit and his own newfound clarity, he used the immense resources now at his disposal to establish the Harris Legacy Foundation. Its mission was simple and profound: to implement his father's technology to bring free, clean water to the communities that needed it most, starting with the very ones Apex Global had poisoned. His sister, Sarah, could only stare in stunned silence, the apology in her eyes more eloquent than any words she could have spoken. The family that had pitted him now looked at him with a mixture of awe and profound respect. And Lily, his beautiful, brave Lily, received the best medical care in the world. With access to clean air and the most advanced treatments, her cough disappeared, replaced by the unrestrained, joyous laughter of a healthy child. Her future, once so fragile and uncertain, was now limitless. They did not abandon the scrap metal bus. It had been their ark in the flood, the crucible where their new life was forged. John, with the help of skilled craftspeople, began a new project. They didn't scrap the bus. They restored it. They lovingly sanded away the rust, polished the faded chrome, and retrofitted the interior. It became a marvel of design and ingenuity, a beautiful, fully functional home powered by a small-scale version of his father's geothermal generator. The once leaking roof now supported solar panels, and the grimy windows were replaced with crystal-clear glass that looked out upon a thriving, reforested landscape. The home they created was a masterpiece, a stunning testament to resilience and hope. When his family came to visit, they were left utterly speechless, not just by the beauty of the home, but by the transformation of the man who had built it. He was no longer the broken veteran, but a leader, a philanthropist, a man at peace, his purpose as clear and pure as the water his father had dreamed of. In the evenings, John would often sit on the steps of the bus, a cup of coffee in his hands, with Max resting his head on his knee. He would watch Lily chase fireflies in the twilight, her laughter echoing through the quiet valley, and he would feel a profound sense of peace. He had inherited not a fortune, but a mission. He had found his honor by defending his father's. The greatest treasure hidden in the rusted-out bus had not been a secret technology, but his own forgotten strength and the unwavering, unconditional loyalty of a very good dog. This story reminds us that hope can be found in the most broken of places, and that true strength is not the absence of wounds, but the courage to heal. It shows that the most valuable inheritance we can receive is not wealth, but a purpose. The bond between a human and an animal can be a powerful force for good, a silent promise that you are never truly alone. If you were inspired by John and Max's journey, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to help us create more stories that matter. And we want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell us about a time an animal's loyalty made a difference in your life.